I was born in St. Kitts in the Eastern Caribbean.
Do you want to describe St. Kitts to me? What St. Kitts is like?
Yes, well, St. Kitts is a very small island with a sugar plantation type industry or business, and nowhere on that island is very far from the coast. That's one of the great advantages of it. And the weather is always very good, so it's more or less a permanent holiday island.
So, were you schooled in St. Kitts?
Yes, I went to school in St. Kitts. My whole schooling life was in St. Kitts, and I remember that as I left school, I went into teacher training, and then came to England after that, purposely or primarily for the sake of further education. I did not intend to stay very long, but I'm here still after those number of years.
Right. Okay, if I can just take you back to St. Kitts again, can you describe family life, what growing up was like in St. Kitts? I mean, you described that it has sugar plantations and it's very small, close to the coast.
Yeah, well, family life, of course, is very different to what it would be in England for English people, as well as it is rather different to the type of life that Caribbean people would live in England as far as family life is concerned. Because back there you have a whole extended family situation where you have not only your parents, but very often your grandparents, aunts and uncles, all of whom are able to assist in the looking after of children as they grow up. Whereas in England, you'd find the Caribbean family doesn't have that wide field, that number of people within the family circle. And even then, life in Britain is more commercialized, so people are very largely restricted to their own families.
Mm-hmm. So you had quite an extensive family back in St. Kitts. Were you active in family life in relation to maybe birthdays, family events, weddings, that sort of thing?
Oh yes, it was a very large family because all the members of, say, my mother's own family and my father's own family will come together on what we would call in our terms great occasions, whether it be christenings, birthdays or whatever. So you'd find that all these people came together, which is something you wouldn't find among us here for a fact. Not all of us did come here. So that is another thing that splits families up.
How many brothers or sisters did you have?
I've got 5 sisters and 2 brothers.
Where do you fit in relation to them?
In actual fact, I am the 3rd child and hence the 2nd son.
Are your brothers and sisters spread out across the globe, or are they?
Well, we all came to England except one sister, the oldest of the sisters, and we have lived in 3 separate areas in Britain. My eldest brother, the first child of the family, he lived in Leeds, and he's always done that. The rest of us have lived in Nottingham, but I have moved away from Nottingham to Wolverhampton, about 18 years ago, and I'm still here. Again, when I came to Wolverhampton, I thought I would only stay 3 years or so down here, but I'm still here.
So where was your first port of call in Britain?
Nottingham was the first port of call, and one of the things that happen is that family units very often tend to congregate where one of the first few came. So although my brother was in Leeds and I was in Nottingham, you find the others did come to Nottingham.
So can I ask how old you were when you first came to Britain?
I was 19 when I came over, yeah.
And what were the reasons at the time for you to come over? I mean, earlier on you mentioned it was to further your education.
Yeah, well, coming to England, for me, the sole purpose was to further my education. I intended to have a university education in Britain, and then returned to the Caribbean. I've had that university education, but I'm still in Britain.
So, were you quite a smart child at school? Did you do well at school in St. Kitts?
Well, I would say yes, because I was actually selected at the end of school for teacher training, which is something is very sparingly awarded to young people at that time. It was perhaps less universal than it is today there.
Did because of this, did your parents have high expectations of you, maybe in relation to other siblings, or was there any pressure in any way for you to do well because you excelled?
No, I don't think they had higher expectations of any of us. One of the things that they always insisted is that all their children will be treated in exactly the same fashion. There will be no favorites, and there will be no sort of super expectations of any particular one.
So, your relationship with your parents, how would you describe that?
Yes, I can remember that vividly. I always will. They were, I remember, very caring people and more interested in how well you take advantage of the educational opportunities there. For them, a child's prime purpose in early years was to take advantage of those opportunities. And I think once you've done that, they were very pleased with you. Nothing could come in the way of education. They were very family oriented. So I think we as children got on very well within that household.
Was religion sort of part of your life?
To the extent that church going and involvement in church activities became automatic. It was a part of life. I'm not too sure about the belief system. I think my parents believed that there was a superior being, but for us children, it became more or less falling in line with the system of church going and joining in church activities, and that's how we grew up.
So, in a sense, you just carried on with that because it fit in and it was the community element of that maybe in St. Kitts, but did that continue in Britain or?
No, strangely enough, when I came to England, one tended to replicate that situation, but that didn't last for very long because, well, for one, the family context, the community context were not there. And I think you need those kind of supporting structures if you're going to continue that situation. Plus, the society to which I had come was more economic oriented than the one from whence I came, and those are the factors which helped to induce a lowering of religious activity.
Earlier on, you said that the first place you lived in Britain was Nottingham. Was that your first place of arrival? I mean, where did you first arrive, and what were your first impressions?
I remember that I arrived at Southampton in a January morning, and I can tell you, as I looked around, I thought, if I had the money on me there and then, I would have gone back the same day. I certainly did not like what I saw, and I thought that life in the Caribbean has got to be better than this.
What were you presented with to make you feel like this?
Well, when you look and you see rows and rows of houses, you wonder how people live so on top of one another, and suddenly you find that the means of communicating with other people is not quite there, or the contacts are not there. You grew up in a society where you probably know most people and you know how you casually speak to everybody, and right away you realize you couldn't do that. You didn't know anybody because on the ship on which I came, of course, there was very few of us from where I came from, and so you realize that there is not much opportunity for start for communication, and it was markedly different to what I knew.
So presumably you tried to communicate maybe in the same fashion you had done at St. Kitts. To what response?
Well, on arrival, immediate arrival, there was very little opportunity to communicate in that way because you were strange. There didn't appear to be much friendliness, so it inhibited effective communication as we would know it before. Yeah.
So what was your intention? From Southampton you went to Nottingham, or was it Leeds first?
I went to Nottingham from Southampton, and then I stayed there for a number of years. I worked, I remember a few days after I got there, I got a job as in an office with British Rail. Those were days when jobs were not very difficult to come by, and however, those kind of office jobs were difficult for people who had just come from abroad, but I had, before I came, obtained the GCE levels and things like that, so I got a job of that nature. And I stayed there for a few years. Then I went into higher education.
So were you solo at this point, or did you have friends with you in Nottingham?
Oh yes, Nottingham was a place where many people from my hometown lived, so that made it. That was the reason for going there. So in the community, after a while, you begin to feel as if you had around you the type of people who you can live with, communicate with, despite what you might call the pressures of very largely non-acceptance or distancing by the host community. You find within your own community you are able to settle and feel pretty good.
And so that support within that community was probably important in assisting you to live and do what you want.
Yeah, well, it was for all of us who had come from there, because another point you have to look at there is that people from, say, Jamaica had their own community structures, and so had people from all the various Caribbean islands. And so it was important that for me and for people who came from the island that I came, we did have enough people to form our own recognized community there.
Your first job here with British Rail, that was office based.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, do you consider yourself quite fortunate to have had that job compared to some other people's stories maybe that you've heard of?
Yes, I was fortunate, quite fortunate, but I did get some assistance in getting that job from a person whom I remember the Nottingham City Council had appointed to look after issues of young people's education and development, and I got to know that person quite well within days, and that was the basis on which I was able to approach employers at the time.
That experience was positive. Were there other negative experiences in relation to work?
Yes, there are always negative experiences. There always have been. For instance, one of the problems when you look and you see jobs advertised and they say blacks need not apply, that kind of thing, of course, can't happen today because we have a Race Relations Act which prohibits that. But that was very common. People at that time from, say, Caribbean, they got typically jobs on the railways, the buses, the hospitals and things like that. I have always thought that if Britain had continued on that road, what we would have had eventually is the evolution of Negro jobs for blacks only, and happily that has not happened for many reasons. Not only because the economic situation had changed, but there was also trade unionism, and there was also legislation to prevent these things developing.
So after your experience at British Rail, what did you go on to do in relation to work?
Well, in actual fact, I left that job and went to higher education. I remember leaving that job to go to Leeds as a student, and I did a degree there. Well, I would say I did a degree at what was then the Leeds Polytechnic, which was a London University external degree, and spent 3 years up there on that. Again, I chose Leeds primarily because, again, support structures were there. My brother lived there, for instance.
How old were you at the time, and what did you study?
I studied economics, the London University external degree, BSc Khan. I studied economics when I was in Leeds.
And that was, how old were you at the time?
Well, I can't remember now, but I would have been in my 20s. So. Mm-hmm.
So moving to Leeds, you talked about support structures there. Did you still have a good relationship, maybe to the same intensity with your brother that you had back home in St. Kitts?
Oh yes. I think you'll find it exists just as it has been. The family relationship remained intact. Not only that, but I still have vestiges of those relationships which are built up in Leeds from that same St. Kitts community up there. So, I was quite happy there, and I did my degree and then left.
Went back to Nottingham?
Yeah, I went back to Nottingham, which was, of course, my hometown, and stayed there for a year, jobless. And then I thought to myself, well, I've got a degree and can't get a job. And I thought, well, this is really ridiculous. So I then went on to Bath University and did a master's degree in management.
So during your year, whilst you were looking for work, out of work, you did some research and decided to go to Bath University.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So why Bath compared to Nottingham, Leeds, the support structures?
Now, well, strangely enough, Bath University, because the type of course they were offering, we had a management degree in management decision analysis, they called it. And I thought that was quite exciting. It appeared to be quite exciting, and it turned out to be quite exciting. And that's why I was there. I was very happy too, because it is quite an old holiday type town, and I had a very good time down there. And it was a new university, a very new, purpose-built, everything on one campus.
So your experience as a young black man studying this MA in Bath, what was that like compared to maybe Leeds?
Yeah, well then, see, what happened is that the support and the friendships you got there were initially from African people. You find there's quite a lot of African students there. And another thing is that the courses, the number of people on courses there, say in management, the different, very small. You have about 15 people on the year's program, and that made life very good because you can all relate to each other much more than when you have say like at Leeds you have a year group of 40. Makes it quite different.
The relationships are more intense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So do you still have any friendships, relationships that you hang on to that still exist from Bath?
Yes, there's about 3 people I continue to relate, to communicate with from those years. It was a very good time, and at least 3 of them, yeah.
So what happened after Bath, after the MA?
Well, I went back to Nottingham, which is my hometown, and then spent a period of unemployment again. Then I started working at the Afro-Caribbean Center there. It was a new thing, and I was coordinating all the activities of that center. There were about 6 of us working there, and I was coordinating that. However, this was more of a community social thing, and I therefore registered with what was then the Sheffield Polytechnic for a part-time master's degree in social policy, which I eventually finished after 2.5 years. But after about 2 years in that job, I then went to work at the Polytechnic. I worked there for some considerable time, the Polytechnic in Nottingham, the Trent Polytechnic as it was.
Sorry, can we have some dates for the Afro-Caribbean Centre?
Yeah, I can't remember the years now, to be quite honest.
That early 70s sort of time around then?
Yes, early 70s, very early 70s, yeah. And then spent about 18 months at the Caribbean Centre. Then I went on to the Polytechnic and worked there for a number of years. In that time, of course, I had completed the master's degree in social policy at Sheffield Polytechnic. And after a while, I thought, for a number of reasons, I thought that I've had enough of the Polytechnic work.
Sorry, what was the Polytechnic work?
Lecturing in economics and management. I thought after a while I'd had enough of this, because I did not believe that I would get any further. You know, I couldn't see a career structure for me. So I decided that I would look for something else. And I got this job as a result of my research, and then I came down here. And when I came down here, I thought I would spend about 3 years on this job and then disappear again, but I'm still here.
So you said you got this job through the fact there was some research you'd done. What was the research?
Yeah, well, I was looking to see what are the types of job in which I can come in, not at the bottom, but a bit higher up, the type of pay, the type of communities I would have to work with. I had begun to prefer working with communities after I'd done the master's degree in social policy. I had begun to prefer working with communities than, say, formally lecturing somewhere. And I thought this was the kind of thing. And that's why I applied for a few jobs of this nature and got this one.
Why do you and why did you enjoy working with communities? What is it about working with communities?
Well, personally, it's much more fulfilling to make a contribution to the way individuals and groups can advance themselves. I've always thought that our communities have established themselves. Without the slightest doubt, we can actually identify communities and say, I identify with this community or that one. Or even if it's not one of your own, it might be, say, even an Asian community. You can say, well, I can recognize a community structure there. I can even different Asian communities within the same town. And Afro-Caribbean communities in particular, if you feel as if you can work with them in a way that help individuals to progress and organization to achieve some of what they want to, then I think that's fine. See, the second stage of this for me was, having recognized communities, you say communities must now be able not only to exist, but to seek what they want for themselves. And I saw my role as being part of an enabler in that.
Is it still the same? I mean, to the present day, is it still the same?
Very much so. I think that's the reason why I stayed in this job all these years rather than 3 years. Initially, as I said, I came for 3 years, but I don't think I would like another type of job, actually. I don't.
So, moving about so much in your life, from studying here, studying there, a job here, how's that affected maybe your personal life? I mean, have you been able to be mobile and pick up things and restart for a year somewhere else?
Yeah, it has not affected me very much. It has not been a handicap. If anything, it has made life interesting, because what that threw up was varieties of ways of living, seeing different ways in which people live and operate. You meet people with different types of interests, and you say, there's a good point, there's some good points, it's worth noting that you might copy it somewhere else, and things like that.
Did you ever experience any housing difficulties?
Very, very. When we came here first, the housing situation was atrocious. For instance, like has been the case in most systems of migration, you actually end up with the least desirable type of housing. And once you get into that, it's very difficult to get out of that. But I'll point out that one of the issues, or one of the respite factors in the extremely poor housing, is that very close to you always were the people who actually formed your community. Because you did not find, say, you didn't have to go 3 or 4 miles to see somebody. You went down the road a few streets away. But you'd find that as years moved on and people have progressed economically, and the barriers of racism and discrimination have been pushed backwards, you'll find that people have moved out from, they're no longer living so close to one another. I think that has really put a new interpretation on what we would now call community or little communities, because it's not like it used to be. Nowadays you might find you've got to go quite some way in your car to see a friend, whereas that wasn't so before. So those are the types of changes that we've seen over the years. But housing was one of the key factors that determined how the community was organized, how it developed, because white people never rented property to you, and on arrival one is not in a position to purchase property, or even if they were able, even if the renting landlords were willing, you'd find that most people on arrival might not have been in a position to rent at those prices at the outset. And so housing was a key determinant of the social organization.
In relation to housing, when you first, now that you've been in Wolverhampton for X amount of time, you came here with the intention of staying here for about 3 years and then moving on. Have you purchased a property here, or?
Yeah, well, let me tell you how things had moved on in housing to answer your question. When I came to Wolverhampton for this job, the first thing that happened is that the council, I remember the chief executive of Wolverhampton Council says, I can get you a flat for 6 months so that you can start your job, which he did. There was nothing out of order with that. Then I didn't get a place of my own, so I had it extended to 11 months. The idea being, I understood that if you had it for 12 months paying rent, they couldn't turf you out after that. So I then went into the rented section, the private rented section after that, and stayed there for a few years. And then after a while I thought, well, I'm pretty happy in the type of work I'm doing. I don't intend really to take another type of job so I might be here for a while, so therefore I bought a house. And that's how it moved on.
So where did you choose to buy a house, and how did you come to that decision?
Well, I wanted a job that I did not have to travel long distance to work, that was not too far from the town centre, that was reasonably modern or built within a few years, must be just a few years old. And those were the issues. Of course, the price for the property will be another issue compared to my income. And those were the issues that determined where I settled.
Sorry, what is the area where you live, if you don't mind?
I live in an area of Fallings Park that used to be Guy's Motors, which I think there was some demolition there, and Guy's Motors no longer there, and houses were built up in the area there. I think they refer to it as Copper Beaches, Fallings Park.
So, working at the Race Equality Council over the years, have you seen many changes that have affected your work within the community?
Yes, there have been tremendous change in that. I'll just say that the work today is nothing like the work when I came. When I came here, you would find that we were centered around solving problems. A person had a problem with employment, they had a problem with their child at school, they had a housing problem, and it was problem oriented. Some people would say, well, why not go to the CAB? Or, as a political party in this town used to say, why not close down that organization and let the people go to social services? But you see, it was very distinct. It was this organization has always operated on the basis that there is a race issue, and that was the source of the problem. The second issue that was the source of the problem is that you find that people who are from different cultures and languages might find it difficult to go mainstream compared to the average English person who knows nothing else. And those were the issues that determined what we did. Today we moved on. You find that we are now looking at participation in many issues in the town. You find that what we're doing is saying, whether it be the local authority, the health authority, they would say they have certain proposals and they would come to us with them. We will consult among ourselves and with the communities and develop our ideas as how to respond to these things, so that when final decisions are being made, we expect that our views will be incorporated in that. Now, there was none of that kind of thing initially, because we're just concerned with the immediate issues of concern.
So there's more of a consultation process that takes place now?
Yeah, there's more of a participation, I would say. We are still concerned about the extent of consultation from a time factor, but there is greater participation, and we actually sit in the working groups and participate in coming up with proposals for this and that. The consultation follows after that, but at least we are in at the very beginning now. It has become somewhat fashionable for local authority, health authority, probation, etc., to actually go down that road nowadays, which when I came here was not heard of.
So when did the organisation begin, and in relation to that, when did you first start working here? I'm just trying to work it out in terms of its life.
I think you'll find that the organisation began in 1964. In one annual report, I have actually catalogued what happened from its start to that year when I wrote that annual report. And stages of development are in that report. Well, I can't tell you the year which one it was now. And I think you would find that having come here in 1981, after the organization was set up in 1964, so it had been going quite a long time, quite some time. and there were different directors at different times with their own perspectives, and each one, I think, stamped their own image on the organization as it went along. Yeah, I think though that probably in those early days there was more of organizations and groups attempting to influence what happened here and how the organization was structured than there is today.
What kind of organizations and groups?
Well, they were very dynamic because they were only here for a short period. Or rather, only a short period had elapsed since they were here, and they still had the feelings of injustice and unfair treatment and a different sort of treatment and lifestyle to what they were accustomed to back in the Caribbean or in the Asian subcontinent. And so groups, organizations were pretty dynamic in saying, we want to see something happen for our people here. Again, that reflected the role of the Race Equality Council at the time, which says we're here to look at the problems people got, because all the groups and organizations were saying, look at the problems we are facing because of racism, discrimination, or difference in cultures and things like that.
Is the Race Equality Council able to stand up on its own 2 feet in town and stand? Do you know what I mean? Is it looking up, or is it sort of influenced by other political forces within the town and having to bow down now and then?
No, for quite some time now, I've been of the persuasion, and I think my committee members are of that persuasion, that we couldn't compromise on issues of fairness, justice. We couldn't compromise on that. For instance, if the local authority was taking an action which we thought was unfair, unreasonable, and we would say so, we will not apologize for doing that. One of the things we get asked when we take that point is, who do you represent anyway? And we say, although we can't say that of all the thousands of people from minority communities out there, we can't say we have been mandated by them to do this and do that and say this and say that. What happens is that we recognize the interests of these communities. We are aware of these interests, and we believe that we can speak on those interests. So that's what we do, rather than saying that we speak for this or for that. But we will never compromise on that. We couldn't. Examples of how we never compromised, for instance, was on what was Section 11 funding. We believed at the time that the monies were not being used to the best advantage of the minority communities, and probably never as it was intended. And we always had a go on that. We never let the issue rest. I think it's because of groups and organizations around the country who took a similar position that the government was forced to change how Section 11 funding operated after a while, where it had to be much more specific, and local authorities had to justify and identify individuals working on Section 11 funding and saying exactly what they're doing.
For those that don't know, what is Section 11?
It was the Section 11 of the 1966 Local Government Act, which said that local authorities can get money from central government to help enable minority communities to be able eventually to go mainstream or to address issues of disadvantage.
Having been in Wolverhampton since 1981, have you? What has the experience been like? Has it been an enjoyable one? Now that we're in the year 2000.
Well, the work has been a very enjoyable experience. I suppose that is reflected in the fact that I would not probably. I do not have an interest in other types of work at the moment. But living in Wolverhampton, I suppose it has been very intense as far as locations and things like that. coming from Nottingham, you'll find that oh yes, it doesn't take long to get out into Nottinghamshire and see open spaces and things like that. It's not quite like that in Wolverhampton.
Okay. You just said it's been quite intense in terms of location. What do you mean by that?
Where people live. For instance, you can identify certain areas where people from minority communities live, and that tells me that the very fact that that is continuing, despite the fact that local authorities and housing associations would say that they have a fair housing policy, you still find that after a number of years there are areas in the town in which people from minorities, communities, congregate. You'd find that All Saints, for instance, more than half the people, probably about 60% of the people in All Saints is from ethnic minority communities. And we have to look at this and say, with a fair housing policy, how is this situation sustained?
So what does it do? I mean, is this worrying you? I mean, what does it say about Wolverhampton?
It concerns me because what it is saying is that whatever the issues are that are creating this type of housing situation is not being addressed. That's what I would say. We still need to look to see what are the many factors. See, it's not just a question of, say, economy, or, it tends to be a whole set of circumstances that determine that kind of outcome. And I think they all need to be looked at together and see really what's the best course of action if you're going to get housing or people living in areas more of their choice rather than what they have to put up with.
What is it like as a black man of your age now, and having been in Wolverhampton since 1981, what is the community spirit like here for a black man?
Well, community spirit, there's still a lot around the, say, our own communities. There's still a lot of that and around our organizations, but I think there is more opportunities to branch out into the wider society. In Wolverhampton, you'd find that the process or the means of association is widening all the time with the amount of leisure activities and social centres not in the town, and black people can participate if they want to. So that is opening it up a little more, so you have a greater variety of opportunities to spend your leisure time, for instance.
In relation to different people of different origins, is there much integration, or do you think we're still quite segregated?
I think within the Afro-Caribbean community, there's no cause for concern, but I think there is very significantly a demarcation, a separation between communities, as opposed to within communities. For instance, I think that you would find that the Afro-Caribbean community and the Asian communities actually recognize that separation or that distancing among them. Strangely enough, the barriers do exist too within, say, the minority communities and white communities, but of course nothing like what it used to be, what I can gather before I came here.
So, what do you feel like you've contributed to Wolverhampton, personally?
Well, I would say two things. One is that I have worked within the REC. I have helped to develop the REC as an organization which can work for and with minority communities in a way much better than it had done before. That's the kind of thing that interests me, that the organization is much more equipped, I think, for dealing with issues. And secondly, I personally have had much pleasure working with black people, not only because the actual work gives me pleasure, but to see when people can actually believe that they and their communities, their organizations have benefited. That gives me pleasure.
So, what about the future of Wolverhampton? Where can you see it heading in relation to race relations?
Well, I think the future is not as certain as I would prefer it. However, or rather I would say, look at certain areas where you find that the level of unemployment among people from minority communities, the underachievement of people from ethnic minority communities, these are matters that help to determine the future. And the prognosis there is not good. Certainly not as good as I would prefer. It's not the kind of thing that tells you we can sit back now. We still have to keep at it. However, one of the more recent developments, I think, will throw very significant light on what ought to be done, because the proposed changes to the Race Relations Act, which makes indirect racial discrimination an issue for organizations, employers, public bodies. Now that's, I think, is a very significant step, and that should help to make some radical changes.
Do you think Wolverhampton is still suffering from Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech?
Well, I would say indirectly in that when I came to Wolverhampton, I found that the political situation in the town was very much to the right of centre. For instance, what I knew as probably more of the Conservative Party in Nottingham, I think that could be used to describe the Labour Party down here, and that the Conservative Party were a little more to the right than that. And then you look at the newspaper, and you look at the Nottingham Evening Post and what it publishes, and you look at the Express and Star and see the line it takes, and you say, things are very much significantly to the right. And I think all of that is from the after effects of the Enoch Powell speech. So people might not see it readily day to day, but in that context I think it has lingered on. Of course, I've always believed that Enoch Powell was wrong when he talked about his blood, because I had never believed that in Wolverhampton you would find black people and white people fighting each other on the street, and it has not happened. There might be, or there are, problems of race as far as institutions, organizations are concerned. I sometimes marvel at the fact that you'll find that white people, who will associate with you socially, are the same people in organizations that are providing the stumbling blocks for you, which I've always found quite amazing.